This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey everyone, it is Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. Do you sometimes struggle to describe your research to non scientists? Does delivering presentations make you feel anxious or overwhelmed sometimes? You are not alone, but there is good news. You can become a highly skilled communicator if you know a few powerful, proven tools and how to use them. To get the free communication tools you need to get promoted faster, get funding, and get buy in for your ideas, go to onefortheweek.com. It is so great to have Dr. Ginger Lockhart on the show today. Ginger is the founder of Quantfish, a statistics education platform for researchers, labs, and organizations. She previously was a tenured professor of quantitative psychology, and her expertise is in research methodology, statistics, and human development. Ginger created Quantfish to bring top level stats training from the world's leading methodologists to researchers everywhere. Over the past 2 years, Quantfish has grown to 15 instructors and thousands of learners worldwide, becoming one of the premier statistics learning platforms for social scientists. Ginger and her husband, also a former academic, live and work from a fixer-upper farm along with their 3 young children. Ginger earned her Ph.D. in human development from Arizona State University. Welcome to the show, Ginger. It is wonderful to have you here.
Super great to be with you. Thanks so much, Mark.
You know, many listeners are earning PhDs or training as postdocs with the aim of landing a tenure track position. And as someone who achieved that post, which is not an easy accomplishment by any means, and then decided to give it up, can you share with listeners aspects of your professorship that you loved and those that were lacking from your point of view?
Oh gosh, well, it's definitely easy to think of what I loved about the job because there's plenty to say about it. I know that there's a pretty common narrative right now because academia itself is in transition. There's a lot of changes being made, and a lot of people are recognizing the shortcomings. But I think this is something that most of us share. So I loved my students. I especially loved the closeness that I had with my graduate students. That's a very long-term and close relationship that you have with somebody. It's a very intensive process. I poured a lot of myself into that aspect of the job. And so I loved that. I liked my particular department at the time. I had a department head who recognized that I was a new professor. I was also a young mom with very young children, and new at the job, new to the state that I was living in. And she left me alone with regard to the types of service things that we can often get pulled into. I think especially women, especially young women, often get pulled into roles that are well outside of what would be considered a professor's job, like admin types of things, planning parties. I hear all kinds of horror stories from other women of things that they had experienced. And with my particular department head, who was also a mom of 3, like I am, but her kids were further along, who just really protected my time. I really didn't have much to complain about, actually, because I was well paid, I was well respected, I was well treated. I loved my students, and I think they liked me back. So why in the world did I do that? Why didn't I leave? So what did I not like about it? We were just talking about how our professions, our respective former professions, have the similar feature that there just isn't really an off button. You can't clock out of it. And even when you do, you set up those boundaries, they're just, at least in certain personality types, at least I have this personality type where I don't do that. My brain just doesn't do that. When I know I have a thing out there, I'm just thinking about it, about what I should and shouldn't be doing. And I know I am not doing it, and I'm feeling badly about it. And I never could get it. I read books. I talked to lots of people about it. I just never could get to that point where it's just like, okay, your brain is off for the day. You're not a professor anymore. It's time to be a mom. What else? I hate the fact in American university life that students have to go in debt for it. I don't like it. And I don't like that many of them have to go into such astonishing debt for a degree that at my university, we only had a 50% completion rate
Mm.
for bachelor students. So only half of them were finishing up and they were going into debt for a product that they weren't receiving in the end. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but there's so many deep concerns that I have about modern American, particularly academic life, that just really gnawed on me in in a more latent way. I was happy to say goodbye to that ecosystem.
Yeah.
Just was very tough. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for underlining those issues, particularly expectations that are sometimes put on women to do these roles or help out in ways that are well outside of what they really reasonably should be expected to do given their level. I think we all want to be helpful, but the more I read about this and think about my past professional experiences and things that were asked of women on the team, the more this really comes into stark relief how unreasonable that is, how wrong it is. And also on the student debt issue, of course, to me, it almost seems like you graduate if you do. The example you were talking about sort of was emphasizing the half of folks who don't. But whether you're graduating or not, to me, it's almost like you're graduating with a mortgage on a house you don't own.
That's
Yeah.
right. On a house that you don't own. And it's going to have implications on multiple dimensions of your life. I think people don't realize that finances impact your relationships, especially your relationship with your partner. It impacts your psychological well-being, your ability to perform in your job. It's so much more than just that dollar amount. It impacts the time that you have in your life to do the things that you want to do. I mean, yeah, I could go on.
Yeah.
It's just, I hate it.
Absolutely. And I want to ask because this is something that I hear a lot in conversations in my work with PhDs is whether when you went into your program, were you thinking that your goal was going to be as a tenured professor and that you were going to stay in academia for pretty much your whole professional life?
Well, I was one of those students. So this sort of started in undergrad. When I was in undergrad, I had no idea what graduate school really meant, what it meant to go get a PhD. And so I had a wonderful teacher who, this was my research methods teacher, who explicitly wrote on a paper that I had submitted. She was impressed with my analytical ability and my verbal ability and said, I hope that you'll consider graduate school and I want to talk to you about it. It's getting close to graduation. I mean, I was just still a really kind of a dumb kid and hadn't thought beyond the edge of my nose, honestly, with regard to what it is that I wanted to do. So I went to see her. She said, all right, I want you to join this lab. It's this great group who has a lot of support for undergraduates, and you're going to go learn how to do research there. And I'm like, so, all right, I just did what I was told. I didn't think about whether it was honestly something that I was actually interested in doing, but I just went there because honestly, I really loved her and respected her because she's a brilliant scientist. I'll just say her name. Her name is Kim Updegraff. She's an incredible scientist and an incredible teacher, an incredible human being. I just didn't deserve it at all. So I went to the next sort of level and went to a lab, and all of them I really liked. I didn't really like the topic, but I liked the people. So I just kept kind of going. And then, once my time there was going to be up, the lead professor there said, you've been great. Do you want a letter? You need to go on to graduate school. I said, all right, they'll pay you to go. I'm like, all right, cool. So that's what I did. And I went on to graduate school and I did well in graduate school, which again, both of these experiences were very qualitatively different from what it means to be a professor, right? So I had a good time. I've always been a good student. I've always shown up and always since kindergarten sat in the front row, nodded my head, raised my hand when I was supposed to, and gave the right answers. And that's just what that was. That was an extension of what that was. Obviously, writing a dissertation is a different thing. There's a certain degree of creativity and agency that you have to have over the process. But I did a good job at that. I passed with honors and I impressed all the people. And I liked that because that was comfortable for me, right? These little wins, I guess you could say. You win, you get an A, you get a sticker on the top of your paper. It's just that I did a postdoc and it was more of that. Actually, 2 postdocs. Oh my gosh. Just more of that. And so where I was protected. I just want to acknowledge that a lot of postdocs really are not nearly as happy as I was. I was living in a place that was relatively affordable and I was making a pretty good salary as a postdoc. And those two things almost never line up. But I impressed my postdoc mentors, just kind of kept going. I thought, okay, well, the next logical step is, well, gosh, all these people put so much into me. And at this point, I'm feeling guilty of thinking about not going to academia because a lot of people put a lot of care, love, energy, and support and mentorship so that I could go and do my thing. So I didn't even consider anything else besides academia, mostly out of guilt. And I feel guilty saying that, but that's really true. It's just that is kind of the nature, I think, of the culture in a certain way. Nobody ever told me explicitly, if you don't go into academia, you've been a waste of my time. But there's something about it that's just in the air, I think. It's it's just this combination where they cared about me and I care about them and still do. And you know what? They actually in the end didn't care. They have other things to think about. They don't care. And so why did I go through all that? At the end of the day, I, y- you know what? Here's what it takes to really be successful in academia. You have to have a burning, firing passion for that topic. And I didn't. I did not have it. And I spent 10 years trying to make it work in a career that I didn't really want because I felt bad about leaving.
Thank you for going into that detail and really being so honest and open. These are feelings that so many have and that I hear about, and it breaks my heart. So, the next question I want to ask you sort of goes to the next step on this, like when you do leave, is this feeling of it's almost like your parents, like you're disappointing your parents somehow, and you don't want to let them down. How emotional that is. And it's just wrapped up in your identity and all these different things that make leaving so difficult when you were a tenured professor. And you probably felt a lot of that when you were going through grad school from the professor that you mentioned and others along the way. I see this mix of really powerful emotions that can be challenging to deal with when you're not really passionate about your topic. And then the courage that I'm sure it took to make the decision you weren't going to continue on after you had reached the mountaintop, but you reached the mountaintop, which many people don't do and aren't able to do. So important. I know listeners are going to get a lot from this discussion, your answer there. I want to ask you now as a next step. Sometimes PhDs who are thinking about leaving academia are concerned that their skills won't be transferable to other jobs outside the academic world. So they're like feeling trapped now in this dynamic. And I'm sure you've seen or heard stories about PhDs actually leaving their PhD degree off of their resume, thinking somehow it's going to be a disadvantage to their non academic job prospects, which really to me is heartbreaking when I think about all the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into getting your PhD. And then at the end of the process, you see it as a detriment when you're trying to move beyond academia. As someone who successfully transitioned to a high impact leadership role, you're a founder, you started this successful startup. What's your take on that idea or those emotions?
What helps me when I'm sort of wondering if I've been sorted into the wrong house, because we're told that our degree is to produce knowledge in that particular area. But what helps me is to think about what are the underlying traits that it takes to do that, right? So if you do research, and this also goes to people in the fine arts, you have a set of extremely sought after skills that are rare, especially the combination of them being rare. So my particular skill set, I have analytic ability. I have a killer set of statistical quantitative skills. I have writing ability. Those two things already do not coexist in the same person usually.
So true.
I have the ability to speak in front of people. So if you've taught at all, then you've probably clocked in enough hours doing that to be better at that than most people, especially if you've taught a class that is not super popular. I taught statistics to undergraduate psychology majors. They weren't there for that. They didn't sign up for that. But I learned that I needed to get up there. I need to sell that topic massively to the 99 out of 100 people who were not interested. Also, just the resilience that it takes. Standing up in front of an audience of people who don't want your product again and again and again. That I developed a pretty thick skin. I don't care what you think. I don't care what anybody thinks now. I used to be pretty wrapped up into that. What are people's perceptions of me? And then that kind of killed that. That was like the antidote to that problem. So again, just thinking about what are the underlying skills, what are the underlying traits that I have that I can take to other positions that are going to be applicable. Communication, broadly speaking, getting up in front of people and doing uncomfortable things, broadly speaking, whatever it is, if it's performing, if it's teaching, being able to communicate complex things to people. There are types of research that I did involved a lot of math, a lot of computing, a lot of brain related types of things. And I had to present that stuff to people who had no idea, who would otherwise not have any idea what I was talking about. I would just recommend when people start to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm a quantitative ecologist. I don't know how to do anything other than count fish in streams. That's not true. That's not true. It took a lot of tenacity, takes a lot of quantitative skills that are very easily applied to other sets of quantitative skills. It takes a certain sense of passion for making discoveries. I mean, they have so much. I could go on and on and on. We all have so much to offer. And I think, oh my gosh, the thing that really breaks my heart is that I don't know what it is about academics. I think we select, if and so there's a self-selection there among people whose worth gets wrapped up into certain products and into certain accolades. And we box ourselves in and we think that we can't do other things. That just absolutely isn't true.
Statistics, communication, persuasion, this idea of selling, sell them what they want, give them what they need. You can call it whatever you want. Don't even call it statistics, but
Right.
have those principles underlying it that they really do need to be able to do the kind of analysis that you're talking about. As an observer from outside who gets a chance to spend all this time with PhDs and kind of think about, mindsets and communications and things like that. I noticed a lot when I was on Capitol Hill and we had fellows from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. We always had at least one or two in the office, and they were full-fledged policy staffers in our office. And there was, in the beginning in particular, there was a hesitancy to comment and express opinions on things that they consider kind of beyond their expertise. And so say, well, how are you defining your expertise? And of course, it was so narrow because that's how it's defined in academia. And they say, well, you're in a different ecosystem now, and we don't actually view expertise the same way. We have a
Right.
much broader definition. And even if you're not an expert, like you say, the underlying skills that you bring to it are not the skills, and the blend of them, as you pointed out, is not typical in this world. So yes, you're highly valuable. And also, I think you touched upon a little bit too. It's your personal story and your attributes that can be extremely valuable, like this tenacity, dealing with ambiguity, courage, things like that. Those are all parts, I would imagine, of being successful in a PhD program and making your way through this highly competitive and demanding process. And a lot of that can be translated when you're in a startup environment or when you're working in a kind of chaotic legislative as well. You draw on those skills, not being focused on, well, here's what my thesis was on. So these are the four corners of my expertise. So much deeper and broader. Thank you for that. And one question that touches on your decision, because we didn't really talk about your decision when you finally realized, like, okay, I need to move on to the next chapter in my life. And that kind of situation can be experienced differently for PhDs, postdocs, folks who are not tenured professors, but I imagine a lot of the emotional elements are similar. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about how did you manage that? Because I could see how powerful all these different forces are, and those are experienced so much by our listeners too. How did you end up managing all that and transitioning to Quantfish?
Oh man, it was a mess. I wish I could tell a neatly packaged story of that transition, but honestly, it was a pretty big mess. So my decision happened actually about 3 years before I even left. And I was standing in the yard. I was holding a baby and I had two other little kids who were just playing out in the yard. And I had a really bad case of shingles.
Mm.
So shingles is this sort of reactivation of the chickens for your listeners who don't know, reactivation of the chickenpox virus. Younger people usually don't get it unless they're very seriously compromised from a stress point. So I was chronically sleep deprived because I had little kids. I was constantly feeling badly about the fact that I wasn't performing to the standard that I wanted to in my job. I couldn't pay attention to anything. I couldn't read articles. I couldn't read emails. I couldn't listen to my students. I felt awful about it. But there was just this weird moment of calm that came over to me and that said, all right, girl, you're done. It's time. You need to do something different. You needed to get on the path towards that, what that different thing is. And I said, okay, we're going to start that. Another 3 years would go by because, oh my goodness, I still had that guilt complex about the people who put so much into me. And then a lot of very well meaning people who I did talk to said, it's okay. You just got to make it to your sabbatical. Just get to your sabbatical. Then you're in the motherland. Then you'll be able to regroup and you'll get there. I said, all right, I'm going to do that. I'm going to keep going until I get to my sabbatical. I get to my sabbatical. I take a sabbatical for a full year, meaning that I did not have to check into my office. I did not have to attend any faculty meetings. I did not have to teach a single class. The day was mine. Obviously, there were projects that I had to attend to, but I thought that I was going to feel better about the fact I was going to be able to attend to these projects. But the thing about it was that in combination with probably aging and the fact that I was still sleep deprived, I could not attend to it in the way that I used to be able to. And part of it is because it just wasn't first nature. It wasn't my default mind state. There are so many things that I think about in my default state, but that work just wasn't one of them. I did not have a passion for the topic. I had to force myself to do it. It just became very clear to me as my sabbatical was coming to a close. When you go on sabbatical, you can't just say goodbye to a job. You have to come back for another year. Otherwise, you got to pay back your sabbatical. Right. And as that was drawing to a close, I was dreading going back. I'm like, I cannot believe I have to go back. I cannot believe that this is coming back again. So then I really, really, really knew that I had to go. And so then I had the conversation almost as soon as I got back with my department head. And of course, I had a conversation with my husband and ongoing conversation. I had conversations for years with my husband, who that previous year said, all right, let's just take this sabbatical. Let's just think about it. And it's no joke to walk away from a job that you would otherwise get to keep forever. This was a stable paycheck. It was a really good paycheck. And I was going to be removing that from our family. It just really did get to that point where I just could not function. I told my department head, he was totally shocked because again, on paper, I looked pretty good. I was an R01 level researcher. So in the United States in science, these are highly competitive grants that you get from the National Institutes of Health. I had an active grant from the Centers for Disease Control at the time, and I had an active training grant at the time. And I was going to have to give that back. My stomach was in knots. And in this position, you have to tell people 9 months before you're going to quit, because that's when the teaching schedules come out. So I was like this lame duck professor. Everybody knew that I was leaving. And I don't know, maybe you should tell me, what does it mean to leave the life that you had? Did people treat you differently when you kind of came out as leaving? Was the vibe weird at all? Or is that a normal thing to do? And it's not a normal thing to leave a tenured position. So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah. It's funny because in a sense, it's sort of a similar dynamic. So now you're the chief of staff in a Senate office. There aren't a lot of people who do that. And those people tend to stick around for a long time. Staff in the Senate is generally older. These are generally people who have decided they're going to make politics their entire career until they go lobby, which I decide not to do either. So I'm really doubly unusual because there generally is a lot more turnover in these jobs, not just the chief of staff role, but just generally change is understood. And of course, House members get elected every 2 years. There's turnover, senators every 6 years. So there's already pre-programmed potential turnover. For me, it was, I'm not going to go into another job that's directly tied to policymaking. I didn't want a job in the administration. I want a new chapter. And I wasn't
Yeah.
sure what that was going to be, which I think was also unusual. It's
Yeah.
you're not just going right into a lobbying job, a cushy lobbying job.
Right.
But that was a process until I came upon working with scientists. And of course, that was weird too. Why are you working with scientists? You're a political operative. Why are you talking to PhDs? So I did a blog post on that. But then I also said, well, I have a PhD too, political hack Democrat. That was my quick response. But anyway, yes, it's in the identity issue is wrapped up in that. You're no longer the chief What does that mean? And all of these things. So thanks for asking the question. It's a process too. And I can see for that year now, or 9 months, whatever it was, how challenging that was for you. Of course, there's shock and
Mhm.
disappointment. And then as people are sort of treating you differently, that has an impact on how you feel on a day to day basis, which can be
Mhm.
so hard because you still have a very important job to do for that time.
COVID hit right at that point. So I didn't see people face to face, and I think that kind of helped to get through it. And, once it was clear that I wasn't there anymore, that I guess I was almost expecting, because I did have relationships with these people, that there would be, I don't know, just at least more conversations or something. But I also think that, just reflecting back on it, it was just really hard on everybody. It was just
Mm,
so hard. And that's just where their minds were. And again, and what I'm really starting to recognize now is that people don't care about you nearly to the extent that you think. And part of me wanted them to be upset and shocked and to try to keep me and all this other stupid stuff. And that's ego and not helpful. So that was another layer of emotion that I was thinking of. But 3 or 4 weeks after, into my first semester of not teaching and not having to do any of the requirements of the job, I was ecstatic.
mhm,
It was amazing. It was really amazing. But then I was like, I also didn't have a plan like you. I didn't have a plan, you
mhm.
know, about what this was gonna look like. What am I gonna do? I had plenty to do. I was a stay-at-home mom, and I still consider myself a stay-at-home mom. Most of my day is spent with children and now caring for my older parents and my parents who are older. It's almost like your mom knocking on your door and you're 13 saying, guess what? You don't have to do your chores anymore. You don't have to do them.
Yeah.
That's
And
awesome,
yeah, thinking about that comparison it seems to me so apt for what you've told us so far, which is your research topic felt like a chore, like to have to do that. It wasn't your passion. And that
Right.
relief not having to do that anymore. I can just like that exhale. I definitely felt that too as I shifted to something that was different, that I wanted to be also totally
Yeah.
different, but still use my expertise. So really, really insightful. And I know just listeners who've experienced this, and so many have, are going to get comfort from your description. And thank you for your honesty and being so open and sharing that, because it is such a hard thing, and to go back there in your mind and think about it isn't easy. But you've landed and created this beautiful thing. So I want to transition to that, which is Quantfish. Not talking about your kids with your husband, I'm talking about
Okay.
your company, which can feel like a baby sometimes, I'm
Oh,
sure.
yeah.
Tell us about Quantfish and what motivated you to start. Are you hiring? All those sorts of things.
It was during COVID. It was a pretty random thought that I had in my head where I think I Googled the phrase, how to start an online school. Because I think I was throwing a tantrum about the fact that American university life is not affordable. And I just wanted to see if there were any LMS platforms, this is learning management platforms, where you could put your own courses. And I was thinking about putting my research methods course and my statistics course online and seeing what happened. And I whacked my husband on the arm. My husband's also a quantitative psychologist. I said, "Hey, let's make a workshop. Come on." And he's like, all right." And so we did. And this is again, like, we had 3 little kids, just to like kind of paint the picture of what's going on. With 3 little kids, it was COVID time. They're probably eating off the floor. It's just absolute craziness trying to prep the things of the semester and trying to Google our way through a workshop. We hadn't even set up a business license or anything like that. And we thought, oh, okay, I guess I'll Google that too. And then from there on, honestly, I built a business one Google at a time, one conversation at a time, 5 minutes at a time, you know, and what is it now? So we have 15 instructors, but we also have 3 or 4 under contract. The way that we structure it is that we are an online school dedicated to advanced techniques and statistics for researchers. And so most of the people that we teach are in institutions that have high research expectations, but not a ton of resources to train them to do it. And so that's a lot. That's most American universities, that's many European universities, and that's almost all universities in other parts of the world. About half of the people who take our workshops are from low and middle income countries. So one of the things, And I wish I could say that this was like the goal from the beginning, but it really wasn't. I was just kind of taking it one step at a time. And then I scoped out and recognized that we just live in this incredible time to where we can make lots of impact for people who wouldn't otherwise have access to this type of training. A huge proportion now are from countries that are not well resourced and who want to join sort of the international research stage. And for many of them, this gives them a way of being able to do that. Top level journals, a certain standard of statistical analysis and a certain standard of reporting. And this is exactly what we teach people to do. We hold their hands through very difficult techniques using what's called micro learning. So these are brief bursts of learning. People do this on their own schedule. A good 70% of our participants are women. Many of them are taking care of families, dealing with political unrest. I mean, it's just this unbelievable. When I sign on to my little dashboard and I can see who's signed on for the day, and I see the people all over the world who have signed on to take one of our courses, my heart, it just beats so much with so much joy and also gratitude. It's extremely humbling. I always say to myself, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve it. How did I get here? But I guess that's how it did get here. It's just 5 minutes at a time, one Google at a time, one conversation at a time.
And that's the best way, I think, to build the kind of business that we're talking about, because otherwise you make these assumptions and start investing in things that people don't want. So doing it incrementally, like, is a way to do it for sure. It's not like
Yeah.
if I build it, they will come. It's, the opposite. They're going to tell me what to build, then I'll build it.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. And there have been plenty of failures where we built things that nobody
Of,
wanted.
of course, it's part of the
Yeah.
process. You're leading Quantfish with your husband, your full-time job. You also mentioned you're raising 3 young kids with your husband, and you've got some care for older parents. I also have aging parents myself. How do you find ways to efficiently manage to the best? Again, this is life and it is messy. Are there any hacks that you have found that you think listeners who are kind of doing similar things might find useful?
So maybe this is helpful to know that I have actually very recently, and I mean within the past 2 weeks, bumped up against the problem of having said yes to too many things. And we all know where that gets us. And especially people with significant caregiving duties. I don't have time to play around, and you don't have time to play around, right? What I have had to do is just come up with an algorithm for things that come my way. And I'm in a position in my career now where all kinds of awesome things are coming my way. Awesome opportunities are coming my way. And I have to say no to almost all of them. So the rule is it's heck yes or it's no. And the only way that it's going to be heck yes is if honestly my time involvement is minimal and it optimally impacts the people that I serve, which are our Quantfish customers. Outside of that, from a job career perspective, I cannot do anything else, and it kind of kills me, and I feel bad. But I that's kind of how it has to be,
Mhm.
and it's the same too in the private side. One of my kids was like, "I think I might want to do soccer," and I'm like, "Do you want to do soccer, or do you like really, really, really want to do soccer? Like, how passionate are we about the soccer?" Because that's gonna mean other things for our family.
Mhm.
Do you have a really burning desire for the soccer? Are we headed for the World Cup? No, no, you're not. So, just just that is probably the biggest thing. The default answer is no to just about everything. The default answer is no to almost, every party. I'm not gonna be the Pinterest mom. If a kid wants to have some type of event, what I'm gonna do, like some type of school related event, I'm gonna buy myself out of it. Here's some money. I'm gonna show up to the thing on the day, but I'm not gonna stay up until 3 o'clock in the freaking morning stuffing Easter eggs, you know, stuff like that. No,
Yes.
I'm not doing it.
Very, very good. So helpful. As we wrap up, Ginger, I want to ask you what your favorite thing is about being an entrepreneur, and then what's your least favorite thing, something that you wish you just didn't have to deal with.
Oh, what's my favorite thing? The creativity. It's a really good fit for my personality. That's just the level of thinking that I have on a default basis. Like, I'm always thinking about the next thing and coming up with new products and new ways to serve our community. I love that. As good at details, which is another reason I had no business being in academia. And they stress me out. but you have to attend to it, right? You can't just like not do your taxes and not keep your books and stuff like that. And I'm not super good at delegating, and I'm getting better at it. So that the part of about entrepreneurship, it's just when you start to get into these phases where it's clearly that it's too much, which I'm in right now. I'm in that. And it is totally hard. And it's not a thing where I can't just hire it out. You can't hire out yourself. You have to build these systems. And it's just hard. And it's hard for me to do that. Like, I don't think like that, but I have to do it. So that's the sort of thing. That is not my favorite. Yeah.
Dr. Ginger Lockhart, just a wonderful, insightful, and honest and really courageous conversation. Thank you for being so open. It's going to make such a huge difference, I know, for listeners who are struggling with many of these same things, and they're not easy. And then also, of course, sharing about Quantfish, which I still think net fit for nerds could be your tagline.
Okay.
But, but
I'll do it.
but no, but anyway, just joking aside, thank you again for taking time also out of your extremely busy schedule to be with us and share with listeners.
Oh, it's just a joy to be here with you. I'm a huge fan of your work, so I was super excited when you asked me to be on. Thank you so much.
Sure. And thank you, listeners, for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.